Welcome to Office Hours 19. I'm here with Graham Chamness. Graham, you've been here before, people have met you, but 19 office hours we've done for this course so far.
It's been a long time.
It's been a long time. Do we have some general feedback you wanted to mention?
We do. So feedback from our users, you've found the readings easier, shorter, manageable, and interesting this week. And you also appreciated seeing two arguments presented by two scholars, Michael Soni and Professor Bull here. And many of you wrote to ask about when you choose the wrong option in assessment by accident. Unfortunately, we can't reset every student's attempt unless it's a technical glitch, so please just be careful. And the final assessment is up. You have until Sunday midnight, that's April 20th. So please finish if you want to get a certification. And there was a meetup event yesterday.
Yes, we had it here in Boston, and we talked about the Yin Ying story, but we will be broadcasting it later as well. It was an interesting event because we used the Yin Ying story from the Tang Dynasty as a way of talking about this great divide between the later imperial and the early imperial. Now, in preparation for our big theme this week, which is why did China remain unified, we asked people first to tell us some things that they thought were important before Professor Soni and I did our explanations about why China remained unified. And things that I think that we can agree to in many ways. There was a shared language, shared culture to some extent, values, religion, shared identity, and then that the mandate of heaven was used to legitimize rulers, which is another way of talking about shared values. Sure. You saw some things in these responses too?
Many students also mentioned the bureaucratic system, the education system, unified measurements, and there was more.
Yeah, sure. I mean, geography, for some people, they talked about that the geographic frontiers were locked and fixed. I'm not quite certain that's really true. I think that certainly the seacoast is fixed, but the northern frontier and the northwestern frontier are quite variable. There was an effective military system and protective measures like the Great Wall, which is certainly right, except when they didn't work, right? And one of the things we'll be seeing in the next part of the course is some of the ways they didn't work. Transportation system, the Grand Canal and other kinds of canals, the road system, I think that's right. Nature and climate. As long as the climate's with you, I think it works, right? But when it gets too cold or too hot.
It's starting to be with us in Boston. So.
Yeah, well, it's starting to get, it was a very cold winter, and at last spring has arrived. The flowers are pushing up. So we had a discussion.
We did.
Why don't you just sort of remind everyone what that discussion was about?
So we had asked you to take sides over the two explanations that were given over the unification of China. On the one hand, we had Professor Bull's explanation, the intellectual, institutional explanation, which stated that through the examination system, even though only a minority of the population was able to actually pass the examinations, the participation in preparing for this really set up Chinese elites so that they would have a set of shared values.
Yeah.
Everyone's studying for the same exam. And Michael Soni's position was that it was local families and institutions centered around the family and local communities that united China.
Okay, so I fear that there were some people who sided with Professor Soni.
There were indeed. Very many. I'll just mention a few. Here we have Jerry Ha, who says he leans towards the social historical theory because of the limited exam participation. If entire villages may not have had anyone study or attempt the exam, the influence would be limited. And then he makes an interesting point that in the United States, if we want to make a comparison, people who run the country, corporate leadership, elected officials, judges, etc., tend to have college educations. And yet these people are less influential, Jerry Haas says, than the electronic media. They're unable, essentially, to meet the mass of...
Okay. And you also had another one, I think, Ronald Yao.
Ronald Yao takes a similar position, and he cites I've never heard this Chengyu, but 天高皇帝远, heaven is high and the emperor is far away, basically arguing that that the government does play the role of giving orders, but it's up to the local authorities to accept them. Anonymous makes an interesting point. In times of peace, the intellectual institution is more important, but in times of crisis, people depend more on the local society and the family.
Yeah, yeah. There were people, however, who agreed with me.
There were some.
Janice Block, for example, talks about the intellectual institutional argument as being strong because it provided people with a way of acquiring status. And these people were important to the government in shaping institutions, particularly educational institutions. And if you didn't pass the exams, you still could acquire status through association with local schools. And so the examination, the education systems does have influence. Chris J20M said, "I am firmly with Professor Bohl on this one." Thank you very much, Chris. But he makes, I think, an argument that I hadn't thought of, and a comparative historical argument. He says, look, if we look across history and across cultures, lots of people have family systems and things like this, but what's special about the Chinese case? And the Chinese case is we have an examination system. And the examination system is something that makes the Chinese case rather unique, because in China, you don't have this splintering that's taken place of Europe. We have many people speaking many different languages, many different regions, different customs, and yet it remains cohesive. And the thing that makes it different is the examination system. So I like that. LLFFPK, both theories working in tandem. That the intellectual, institutional talks about a centralized norm, and local people would develop their own way of thinking, yes, so you have local diversity, but you have still a shared norm that's really from the center that local people may participate in. But let's go back to you. Tell me what you mentioned.
We have actually a lot of these in tandem explanations. Curious Canuck says that he doesn't think these explanations are mutually exclusive either. The intellectual institutional explanation, however, he sees as more convincing because local culture alone can't explain political unity. Yet on the other hand, we still see that local communities did play a role in unifying China. So Megan Eves says that both of these arguments can work together because every society has both an elite class of people and what she calls a normal class of people. And so these two arguments present a way of understanding two sectors of the Chinese population.
Okay. So Lee Sanders actually comes up with an argument that I had not thought of, and he makes the point that if we want to understand the social historical explanation, we need to take two other things into account. And that's one, and it's mobility and communication. And his argument goes something like this. Mobility, the people who are most mobile, right, will be people who have the most communication and will be interested in shared communication, such as provided by the examination curriculum. And people who are not mobile are going to be more local, and for them, there's less communication, and there's going to be less interest in going outside, because really what's local is what matters to them.
Was that true?
So I'm still thinking about that, and I'm not sure, because I think that at one level you're right, that villages are sort of outside of things, and local elites are not necessarily local villagers. They are, as Megan Eves was saying, they're an elite class, and yet they play a role locally. Both they're the people who have money, they're the people who own land, and so on. And they are interested in communication, no question about it. So I just hadn't thought of talking about it this way before, so thanks a lot. What else do we have? Let's see.
We have Arya D.
Oh, Arya D gives, well, it's a long one.
It is a long one. We'll summarize his or her argument. He points out that, I guess I'm assuming Arya is a she, points out that small government, that although the intellectual institutional argument points to the small number of people in government, it nonetheless has strong ties. Finally, there were no more great clans, is pointed out.
Well, I want to interfere is because she talks about the rural population and the lack of great clans, But she says the rural people seem to have had their say be heard by the central government. There were no draconian punishments or harsh taxes to drive the rural poor towards rebellion. I actually think that the lack of draconian punishments or harsh taxes may not be determinative, because there certainly was rebellion in all these periods. So there are lots of reasons for rebellion. So that doesn't disappear, but actually that would make local leadership more important as a way of trying to contain rebellion.
A final point is rule by values, which is seen as the most important aspect. Despite there being no big government, there was certainly a system of values keeping everyone in line, and this was Confucianism and Neo-Confucianism.
And one of the things she did, she looked at all this wonderful material we had from Dongyang that we had done in China, and she says, she points out that there are monuments that celebrate the civil service, human decency, woman's chastity, and things like this, so that the landscape actually is marked with things that are all about values. And I think that's a really, really good point. Well, Graham, thank you very much, and thank you all. What?